In the beginning, when the fires of the Great Crusade still burned bright across the stars, the Emperor of mankind had not yet been bound to his throne. The Imperium was still young, still full of purpose and pride, and the golden banners of humanity spread from Terra to the edges of the galaxy. Yet the burden of divinity had not yet fallen upon the master of mankind. In this alternate fate, there was no golden throne, no life support, no endless pain of the eternal vigil. There was only the Emperor, unbroken, unburned, still walking among his sons. He had foreseen the rise of chaos, the tides of the warp, swelling with the whispers of demons and false gods. But in this timeline, he chose differently. Rather than chaining his mortal form to the machinery of the Astronomican, he entrusted that power to the psychic network of humanity itself, to the souls of billions united by faith and will. The throne, an unfinished relic, was left cold and silent beneath the palace, a tomb never filled. Without his immolation, the heresy took a different path. Horus still fell, touched by the whispers of the warp. But when his betrayal came, it was met not by a dying father, but by a living God. The siege of Terra unfolded under the golden skies of the imperial palace, the air burning with lightning and psychic fire, as the emperor strode into battle, not as a frail man upon a chair, but as a blazing titan. His presence alone shattered demons. His voice silenced the warp. Yet mercy still lingered in his eyes, for he saw in Horus not only rebellion, but sorrow. And in that moment of hesitation, fate shifted once more. The War Master was struck down, but not annihilated. The Emperor, unwilling to unmake his most beloved son, cast him into the eye of terror, alive, broken, and lost. And thus the galaxy was denied its martyrdom. Horus lived, and so too did the curse of chaos within him. The traitor legions fled not in defeat, but in retreat, their loyalty torn between despair and hope that their father might one day forgive them. With the war ended but not erased, the Imperium entered a new age, one of fragile unity, enforced not by relics, but by his living will. The Emperor no longer ruled from a throne. He walked among his people, traveling the void upon the eternal crusader, speaking to worlds long forgotten and rekindling the flame of humanity. The Mechanicum called him the living Omnissiah. The Ecclesiarchy called him the true God. And the Astartes saw in him a leader without end. But such presence came with a price. The warp, sensing his light, turned its full fury upon the Materium. Storms raged, demons clawed at reality, planets burned beneath psychic tempests. Without the throne's beacon to stabilize the Astronomican, warp travel became perilous. Fleets were lost, empires drifted apart. The Emperor's choice, to remain living and unbound, had fractured the galaxy even as it saved him from eternal death. He sent forth the custodies and the Inquisition to maintain order. He commanded Guilliman to rebuild the broken legions into chapters. He forgave Sanguinius's sons their thirst. He guided Vulcan's fire, and he mourned the silence of the lost Primarchs. Yet every act of mercy carried with it the echo of inevitability. For even gods cannot stand against the hunger of eternity forever. As centuries passed, the Emperor's power began to wane, not through age, for he was eternal, but through division. Humanity began to worship not the man, but the myth. Shrines rose across Terra, towering cathedrals that proclaimed his divinity, not his purpose. He walked among them, unrecognized, as priests shouted his name into the void. He had sought unity through will, but found only faith. And faith, like fire, consumes as much as it warms. In the far reaches of the segmentum obscurus, the eye of terror pulsed like a wound. Horus had become something more, not the slave of the gods, but their rival. The Chaos Pantheon, enraged that their chosen had been denied final victory, now feared the Ascendant War Master. In the eye's heart, Horus forged a new legion, not of flesh, but of spirit. Warriors bound by hatred and memory, their armor forged from the souls of traitors and loyalists alike. He no longer sought to destroy his father. He sought to surpass him. As Horus rose in the warp's blackened realm, the Emperor gathered his remaining sons. The surviving Primarchs stood before him in the ruins of Luna's spires. Guilliman, Leman Russ, Dorn, and the pale form of Corvus Corax, all waiting, all uncertain. He told them of the future he had seen, a galaxy devoured not by chaos, but by silence. A time when even faith would fade, when the stars themselves would grow dim, and humanity would turn inward to die in the dark. He could not allow that end to come. And so, he created the Second Crusade, not a war for conquest, but for remembrance. Each Primarch was sent beyond the Imperium, to reignite the flames of mankind where it had gone cold. Guilliman to the eastern fringe, Russ to the dark voids of the halo stars, Dorn to the dying fortress worlds, and the Emperor himself. He went to confront Horus once more, but this was not the heresy reborn. It was something far more dangerous, a duel between living gods. The warp howled, the Materium shuddered. Demons wept in terror as the Emperor stepped into the eye, his radiance turning the storm to gold. Planets within the eye ignited, stars collapsed into light, and for the first time, chaos trembled. In that moment, Horus saw him, not as the tyrant of old, but as the father who had once believed in mankind. For the briefest instant, the two were no longer enemies, but reflections. One shaped by faith, the other by failure. And then the galaxy burned. In the endless night of the 41st millennium, the Emperor of mankind still walked among his children. The stars burned dimmer than before, yet his light endured, not as a beam of psychic fire from the golden throne, but as a living flame carried within the hearts of men. He had refused to die upon his machine, and so he became something else, a god that refused godhood, a ruler that chose the dust of battlefields over the comfort of eternity. The Imperium had survived the heresy not by relic or legend, but by his will alone, and that will now face its greatest trial. Across the galaxy, the scars of the Horus War never fully healed. The traitor legions had been banished into the Eye of Terror, but their whispers bled into every corner of the warp. Horus still lived, a shadow crowned with burning eyes, building an empire of ghosts and memory. The Emperor knew this wound would fester forever if left untended. And so, he prepared for one last journey into the storm. Before leaving Terra, he walked through the empty halls of the Imperial Palace. No priests followed him now, for none recognized the simple robed figure who passed beneath the arches. The throne still stood silent, a monument to what might have been, a tomb for a god who never died. Dust and silence hung in the air. The machinery that once promised salvation was cold, its golden frame untarnished, but lifeless. The Emperor laid his hand upon it and whispered only a single word: choice. He left Terra without fanfare. Only Malkador's echoes and the Custodes knew of his departure. The silent watchers guarded his path as he boarded the vessel, Sol Invictus, the last of the golden ships of the early crusade. Its hull shimmered with runes older than the Mechanicum, designed by his own hand to pierce the madness of the warp. With him came no army, only light. When the ship entered the eye, the storm screamed. Realities twisted upon themselves. Planets burned in reverse, stars froze mid-flame, and demons howled as the Emperor's presence carved through unreality like a blade of thought. He walked through worlds that once belonged to his sons. Shattered fortresses, corrupted cathedrals, legions of lost warriors who knelt in madness and memory. Each step he took turned corruption to ash. Yet with each stride, his light dimmed. The warp consumed everything, even divinity. At the eye's heart, he found Horus. The War Master sat upon a throne of bone and iron, surrounded by legions of hollow armor, the spirits of traitors bound forever to their shame. His eyes burned with the light of the gods he had betrayed. But when he looked upon his father, there was no hatred left, only sorrow. For 10,000 years he had waited, and in the waiting, he had become something the gods feared, a being made from regret. The two stood upon the same field where once the Emperor had slain him. Time itself folded upon the memory of that moment. Around them, the galaxy watched. The Emperor spoke not with words, but with thought, and his voice reached even into the Materium. Every psyker across the Imperium trembled. Every astropath saw only gold. Horus rose, and the storm shifted. There was no battle as mortals would know it. When gods clash, reality itself is the weapon. Planets shattered in silence. Warp tides screamed across the void. Demons were unmade by the echo of their own creation. The Emperor's light met Horus's shadow, and for a heartbeat, they were one. Father and son, purpose and failure intertwined. In that moment, Horus understood. The gods of chaos did not grant him power. They had chained him with it. The Emperor had refused that chain. And so, with his last act of defiance, Horus broke himself free. His power burst outward, tearing his soul apart, scattering it through the warp like burning stars. The eye trembled. The gods screamed. And the Emperor stood alone once more, surrounded by silence. But his victory was not without cost. His light was fading. The warp had claimed much of his essence, draining his immortality into the void. He could not return as he was. And so, he chose to give what remained of his power to humanity itself. Across the galaxy, psychers and dreamers, soldiers and children, all felt a warmth ignite within them, a spark of something divine. The Emperor's consciousness spread through them, like dawn through darkness. The Astronomican blazed to life, not as a single beam from Terra, but as a constellation of 1 billion minds united. Humanity itself became the beacon. The throne was no longer needed, for the galaxy had become his throne. The Mechanicus called it the Second Awakening. The Ecclesiarchy called it the Day of the Living God. To the Astartes, it was the last march of the Emperor. But to the Emperor himself, it was simply fulfillment, the destiny he had envisioned since the dawn of man. A humanity that no longer needed to worship him, because it had become him. The warp storms began to calm. Demons fell silent, their power severed by the dispersal of divinity. The gods of chaos found themselves starved, unable to feed upon despair, for the Emperor had replaced fear with unity, not through conquest, but through shared light. Worlds once lost to the Imperium reappeared. Fleets long vanished returned to real space, guided by the song of the living Astronomican. Yet balance demanded price. With his power dispersed, the Emperor's form could no longer sustain itself. He drifted among the stars, neither dead nor alive, a whisper in the warp, watching over his children. On Terra, where priests still prayed before the empty throne, a wind passed through the hall, warm, golden, and kind. Candles flickered without cause, and the faithful wept, feeling for the first time the presence of their God not above them, but within. The Imperium changed, no longer an empire of fear, but of purpose. The Astartes became guardians rather than conquerors. The Inquisition dissolved, replaced by the Ordo Aeternum, seekers of truth rather than heresy. The Mechanicus began to rediscover the lost age of science, guided by visions of gold. And humanity, once fractured, began to dream again. In the Eye of Terror, where Horus's soul had scattered, fragments of light remained, shards of redemption glowing faintly in the dark. Even the warp, endless and cruel, could not consume them all. From those sparks rose something new, something unknown. Some said it was hope. Others called it the beginning of the end. And somewhere in the deep void, beyond the reach of time, a single voice whispered, neither command nor prayer, but memory. I am still with you. The stars burned brighter that night.